This partnership between Apple and Samsung. Surprise you?
Yeah, it is surprising, and I think I have a particularly unique perspective here. You may recall for a long time I prophesized that Apple would in fact come out with their own TV, that there's something structurally wrong with the TV, kind of integrating exactly iTunes, and the hardware piece was always missing. And so I was surprised to see this. I no longer I no longer believe that they're going to have their own television. I do think that this is, first of all, evidence that Apple is really trying to advance what they're doing on the services segment. It's pretty obvious now, opening up. This is the first time working with a TV manufacturer to allow iTunes. So you can not only buy and rent movies and TV shows, but you'll be able to access your library. And so that's a big deal. But I think it is just further evidence as we think about new product categories that even if there was an outside chance that Apple comes out with the television, I think that even became more distant after yesterday's news.
Gillian, I was reminded when I saw this that it's 15 years ago, pretty much this week, since Carly Fiorina keynoted on the CES stage to announce the HP iPod. This was right after Apple announced iTunes on Windows, and it was because within Apple they determined that the iPod had greater potential than just selling more Macs. Does this similarly signal that Apple sees something in its services pipeline that has greater potential than just selling more iOS and Mac devices?
Here is the amazing thing about Apple, which is that it has reinvented itself around different products over and over again. And you might say that's obvious, but when you compare it to other tech companies, say like Sony, you can see that its ability to basically create new products has been extraordinary, or at least it has until now under Steve Jobs. And in many ways, this is Tim Cook's defining moment, because people are starting to talk about what will Apple look like post-iPhone. Can Tim Cook now pull off the Steve Jobs trick and essentially create a whole new product series beyond the iPhone to keep growth powering ahead? And shifting into services may be one way to do that. It's something we're seeing right across the tech sector right now, right across the manufacturing sector. But whether he can come out with a new frontier is really what everyone's watching.
Gene, what do you think? Especially when someone like Kara Swisher comes out with a column in the New York Times saying, is this the end of the age of Apple?
I think it's ridiculous. I think we've seen this before. There's a pendulum in investing in Apple, and it now is on the side of disbelief. Understandable given what happened last week, but I think the piece that gets missed here is the company financially is in great shape, and the fact that they're having an all-time record quarter despite a miss. That usually doesn't happen. Usually when you have a revenue miss, there's an exaggerated negative impact on earnings. In fact, they're going to have a record quarter. The reason why I emphasize that is twofold. First, it really emphasizes that the company has a great cash position to continue to advance what it's doing today and add new pieces to it in the future, whether it be around AR content or something in autonomy. So they're in a good financial position to ultimately do that. The second reason why I emphasize that is it really gets to the core of this intersection, this fork in the road that Apple's at when it comes to investors. They simply are not getting rewarded for their outperformance in earnings. When they put up a touchdown, they don't get 6 points like Google would. They get 2 points. And ultimately, is Apple needs to either just commit to being an earnings powerhouse and not getting the proper multiple, or be more aggressive in coming out with new product categories to try to really satisfy investors' desire for revenue growth.
Gillian, I would argue that Tim Cook has already proven himself. I mean, even Steve Jobs only did the iPhone once. Tim Cook scaled it. He launched the Apple Watch, which in Apple history would have been an absolutely huge product, but the iPhone has just overshadowed it. I wonder how much of what Apple does with services is what's echoing through the halls of CES this week. And what I mean by that is there's so much talk about the Internet of Things. There's so much talk about services. There's not any one hit platform or even device type that's really powering this thing. I mean, even though you got Google Home and the Echo out there, I don't think anybody thinks that that's going to be as big as the smartphone.
No, we are really a very interesting moment, this kind of Cambrian evolution of the tech sector right now, where you have lots of different experiments leaping off in different directions, but trying to work out what's going to be the dominant next species, if you like, simply isn't clear. It's ironic that actually at the very same time that you got CES happening, I've just come back from Atlanta from the American Economic Association, where a lot of the economists in America today are trying to look at what's happening in manufacturing today, partly because of the trade war issues. And I heard a couple of fascinating presentations from economists who are saying that there's really clear evidence that big US manufacturing companies, including in the tech sector, are really switching to services on a massive scale in a way that you can see in the data. It's going to be incredibly interesting to see how that develops as this new trade tension between US and China accelerates and deepens. But one thing that's also very clear, sadly, when big manufacturing companies, whether it's Apple or others, tech sector, move from manufacturing into services, unfortunately that creates some very high paid jobs for the lucky few, particularly in areas like Silicon Valley. Of course, it doesn't help with many of the lower paid workers.